Welcome back to another episode of the Mindful Hunter podcast. I am your host as always, Jay Nichol. And a little bit of context, I'm recording this podcast while driving home from my most recent hunt. I'm going to do what I can to clean up the audio in post. Hopefully the background noise from the truck is tolerable. So today's podcast episode is going to debrief my archery whitetail hunt in Northern Alberta. And then we're going to go through a breakdown of the gear, what I used, what I liked, what I didn't, and what I would potentially do different next time. So before that, let's start with a little bit of housekeeping. As most of you know, I launched Mindful Reviews last week. If you haven't heard about it yet, it is a review community that I've started. It's a paid per membership community. The membership starts as low as $5 a month, so pretty low commitment. And essentially what I'm trying to do is centralize the way I'm doing reviews and try and create a community around it so that I can afford to do more reviews, more in-depth reviews, get more products, and get more feedback from people. So with membership, you get to participate in the review selection process. So you'll have a voice in exactly what categories I look at and what products I look at in those categories. There's also, we got our 40 members already. There's some really great community engagement, so you can ask for individualized gear advice, hunt feedback, all kinds of stuff. It's really fantastic. Now, the two really big ticket items are when I raffle off gear items, I will no longer be opening those up for public participation. You will have to be a member of Mindful Reviews in order to participate in the raffles. So prime example, when this podcast goes live on Thursday, there will already be a raffle just posted that day for a Seek Outside Goshawk and a Stone Glacier Terminus. I'm only selling 50 tickets. They will be $40 a piece. And you will have 1 in 25 odds of winning one of those backpacks. But you will have to be a member at Mindful Reviews in order to qualify for that raffle. So if you're interested in it, you can even just go buy a $5 a month membership, participate in the raffle. If you really want to cancel your membership afterwards, go ahead. There's going to be no hard feelings. I personally think that the community is such a good value. I don't think you're going to want to leave. Now, there's two other types of memberships. There's yearly, $50 a year, and you save 16%. You get all the same stuff that you do with monthly. Or you go lifetime. It's $250 one-time fee. You get a membership, good for your lifetime. The benefit of that is that every 3 months, I'm going to be doing a draw for like a big-ass hunting-related prize. You don't need to pay additional for this. All lifetime members are entered in this draw automatically. So as of February 1st, that'll be 3 months since I launched, I will be drawing a name for a Yeti Roadie 48 cooler. It's like a $450 US prize, beautiful cooler, and anyone who's purchased a lifetime membership will get entered into that draw. All right? So if you have any more questions about Mindful Reviews, if you want to participate, it's just mindful-reviews.com. If you've already been engaged and you like it, please share it. I would greatly appreciate it. It is the part of Mindful Hunter that I'm going to be putting the most amount of my energy into, except for specifically, my hunts and filming hunts and becoming a better hunter. But from a business perspective, I think that's the future of Mindful Hunter. There's nothing like it right now, and I think it fills a really big hole. I won't start off every podcast with some 10-minute lecture on it, I promise you, but it's still just in its infancy, so I really want to make sure that people understand the value proposition and what they stand to benefit if they decide to participate. So I just finished a guided archery whitetail hunt in Northern Alberta. First hunt of that kind that I've really done. It was kind of a friend of a friend. He's not a really big outfitter, really good guy. And last year, I went and did like a 3-day little archery whitetail hunt in Region 8, just to, just for the experience and to put some extra meat in the freezer. And I really liked the concept of stand hunting. I'd never done it much before, and it was just an element of hunting that I didn't have much experience with, and I really liked it. So after that hunt, I started looking around for another whitetail hunt that I could book somewhere else. Somebody reached out, hooked me up with this guy. I booked a hunt. That's how the whole thing kind of got set up. Now, I didn't know a whole lot about it. I knew it was Northern Alberta. I knew this guy had taken a lot of really big bucks in the past. I knew some people who had got big bucks with this guy. Spoiler alert, I did not see a deer, or I did not get a deer. I did not kill a deer, and a bit of a Freudian slip. I also did not see one single shooter buck. And I guess if we were going to start off on the negative parts, that's the biggie. It's pretty disappointing. I'm not going to lie. I like to think I'm a pretty optimistic guy. I was kind of under the assumption that this was the type of hunt where you were going to see a lot of deer, and it was more about having the patience to hold out for a big deer as opposed to just never seeing any deer at all. The only bucks that I ever really had in bow range were just like spikes. Not even like a 120-inch buck or anything. When I say no shooter bucks, I mean nothing even remotely close to a shooter buck, and not even one. So that sucked. There's no sugarcoating that. Now I think if we get into the details of the hunt, there are some elements that kind of explain that. One, it's the first week in November. When I originally booked the hunt, we were looking more towards like the second or third week of November, sometime around the 15th or the 21st. He was still able to do that, but through a miscommunication with my wife, she'd approached me about going away on a trip from the 14th to the 20th. And she's always so good about my trips. I didn't really think much about it. And I said, yeah, of course, go ahead, book your trip. And then realized afterwards that was the week I was supposed to go on this whitetail hunt. I couldn't do the last week of the month, so I had to do the first week of the month. So that's part of it. The rut really hadn't kicked off yet. Also, weather was a little bit weird. It should have been ideal, to be honest with you. Like a little bit warm that first day, and then this cold front came in, and it was really minus 15 to minus 20 with a little bit of fresh snow every day of the hunt. From what everyone was telling me, that should have been the weather that would have produced some ideal hunting circumstances, but it just didn't seem to. There was a couple other guys up there. They weren't clients, they were just hunters. That was another, it was kind of weird that the guide was taking around, I guess just his buddies for hunting. At the same time, he was taking me around being guided, but not the end of the world and not completely out of the normal. It wasn't like I missed out on any hunting experiences or anything. But they, one of the other guys did see a couple, semi-decent bucks, like maybe in that 140 range. Not what they would consider a shooter up there, but for my first archery whitetail hunt, especially by the later part of the trip, I probably would have been quite happy with the 140 buck, to be honest with you. And then the other guy, he did shoot a buck with his rifle on maybe the 5th day or something like that. And again, wasn't like a trophy class buck, but it was a really sweet buck, like really nice rack, kind of gnarly and yeah, cool looking. Anyways, so yeah, there were some other dudes there, and there were some bucks seen, and there was a buck taken. I just was never in the spot where the bucks happened to be. And that's the interesting thing about all these stands. Like, he did have access to a lot of stands, and you'd like pick one, and then that night there'd be pictures on the buck on the other one. So then you'd go to the other one, and then there'd be pictures of the first one. And in hindsight, part of me is like, I wish I'd have just picked a stand and just worked it every day. I feel like the odds of something walking by might have been higher. Now, let me also get into like maybe some of my responsibilities on the hunt and some of the things that I did and didn't do that contributed to the, you know, lack of success for lacking for a better term. I have only ever hunted out of ladder stands previously. And so ladder stands are 15 to 20 feet high. They're normally pretty wide. They're all built a little bit differently, but they normally have some type of safety bar. Like, they're a little bit sketchy, but I don't really know anybody who couldn't muscle it out sitting in a ladder stand. They're pretty safe. They're pretty secure. You'd be hard pressed for anything bad to happen to them. So in my mind, when we were going to hunt stands, and he even said to me after I booked the hunt, "Are you okay with heights?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't like heights, but based on my previous experience, I'm like, it's not that big a deal. I'll be fine." Well, we get to the first tree stand, and I'm just like, "Are you kidding me?" You know, it's 30 feet up in a tree, at least. It's a pretty small stand from what I've seen previously. Now that I've talked to other people, I'd say it's pretty industry standard for these like kind of hardcore whitetail guys. But it's up a big poplar. And that's something else that I'll get into here in a minute. And I was taken aback. I'm not going to lie, man. Like, I'm not a pussy, but my kind of asshole puckered a little bit. I was like, holy shit, man, I do not want to get up this tree. But I'm also, we've quadded a bit, we've walked a bit, we've driven a bit. Like, I'm not turning around, you know? So I was like, okay, let's do this. Climbed all the way up in that first tree. It's probably 6:30 in the morning or something. Well, this is before the time change happened during the hunt. So some of the times are going to get out of whack here, but it was an hour before daylight. It was still the dark. Nothing had happened yet. And so I get up all the way in the tree, and yeah, it's not pleasant. I was very anxious. It was not an enjoyable experience at all. But I'm like, okay, this is the deal. This is how you do this. I'm just gonna muscle through it. So, and that was probably the best stand, or the stand with the highest likelihood of success of all the places where I went. And I will say that if I had been more comfortable in that stand, and if I had just been willing to sit in that stand every day, I don't know if I would have killed a buck, because there's still a lot of skill involved in being able to come to full draw and loose an accurate arrow while whitetails are like right underneath you. I learned that even from just practice drawing my bow around the does and spikes, just to get used to it. It's very hard to do. It's doable, but very hard to do. But I do feel confident that if I had just sat that one stand, I would have seen bucks. Like, there was definite activity back there. But I sat in that first stand for probably six hours at least that very first day. And then, I don't know how many of you have tree stand experience. It's really hard. There's like a little, 8-inch by 8-inch kind of seat cushion thing you're sitting on. And then your knees are bent. And then you have a little ledge that you can put your feet on. But other than that, very little movement is going on. You're kind of sitting in the same posture for the whole time. And it's just hard on your body. I'm not going to, make any excuses. There's lots of dudes who can sit all day. But I also feel like it's a little bit like mountain hunting. Like, if I took somebody on their first sheep hunt, or their first elk hunt, they're going to get halfway through the first day and go, this is crazy. I can't keep this pace up all day. But for somebody who's done it multiple times, it doesn't even really seem like that big of a deal. And I feel sitting in a stand is very similar. I think if you're used to it, it's very doable. If it's new to you, it's challenging. I found it challenging. So around, I think it was 12:30 or so, I shot him a text and I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of hitting a wall here. I'm going to climb down. And he was like, okay. You could tell it wasn't like super well received, but fair enough. I think the plan had been that I was supposed to sit there all day. If I was going to provide any constructive feedback, I think really being clear with, like, I told him when I booked the hunt, I've never tree stand hunted really other than 3 days last year for whitetails. And I think his setup was a little severe. It was a little aggressive. I've showed pictures to like hardcore whitetail hunters and everybody's kind of on the same page. I don't think it's unreasonable. I don't think it's unsafe. I think it's a perfectly acceptable way to hunt. But if I was going to say anything, I might be a little more clear with people what the expectations are. Like, you're going to be getting up in a poplar pretty high up in a pretty small stand, and it's going to be physically challenging in order to sit there. We never really had that conversation beforehand, but I never asked those questions either. I could have found some whitetail hunters and figured out what some better questions to ask. So I don't want that to seem like I think that was, his fault or anything like that. Just in hindsight, that would be a good conversation to have. And part of the reason I'm sharing this stuff is that maybe there's somebody listening to this who's going to be booking a whitetail hunt soon. These are the types of things I would be asking. Like, what are your stand setups like? What are the times of most activity? Are we talking all day sits? Are we talking morning and evening sits? What kind of temperatures? All of those kinds of things you're going to want to know before you go on one of these hunts. So anyways, I came down from that first stand, and he was like, okay, he came pick me up on the quad, and he's like, what's the deal? Do you want to take a break and go back in that one? Do you want to go somewhere else? And I just said to him, I really don't want to go back in that stand. It's freaking me out. And he's like, yeah, okay, I got some other ones. And he took and put me in a spruce stand. And I got to say the difference between, and this is like, I never would have thought there was a difference between sitting in a spruce and sitting in a poplar. But psychologically, it's like night and day. And he right away said to me, I don't think it's the height that's bothering you. I think it's the barrenness of the tree, which kind of didn't make sense to me at first until he put me in the spruce tree. And then with a spruce tree, you've got branches coming out beneath you. So it's not like you're just floating in space, and it just takes the edge off. Like, there's still a couple moments, like when a stiff breeze comes and the thing starts wobbling, like you're definitely like, "Ugh." But overall, you can just sit up there and relax into it. I think that was the other reason my back got so sore on the first stand. I think my whole body was just clenched. I think I was so nervous up there that I was just flexing the entire time. And I think it just burnt out my back. And so once I got into the spruce, I was like, oh my God, this is great. I can do this every day. Now, unfortunately, there wasn't enough stands like that with enough activity on them that was an option. So we were primarily going into these poplar stands. And I bet you I did 50-50 poplar and spruce. And I feel like I did other stands that were just as aggressive as that first poplar, but because I had such a negative memory of the first poplar, he kept saying, do you want to go back into and he had a name for it that I don't want to share in case I blow the spot up, but he had a name for that stand. He said, do you want to go back in that stand? I'm like, I'd rather not if you got another one. And he was super cool about it. He's like, yeah, we can go to another place. But I do feel like he was trying to be super cool about it. And he probably was more thinking like, if you really want to kill a buck, this is the stand you need to go sit in. And that's why I said, in hindsight, like, I'll take some of that responsibility, because if I'd have said to him, I just want to go sit in that stand, I would have seen more bucks. And I never said that. So that one's on me. Now, we were going to go sit that stand the very last day, and I legitimately forgot my harness back at the house. It was the only day I ever forgot anything. It was kind of a funny situation because I'd been leaving my harness in the truck, and that night somebody brought the harness in and set it in front of my bedroom door. And so I took it off the floor and stuck it in my bedroom, kind of in a corner. And the next morning I packed up all my gear, just got in the truck and left. And because I had just had my harness in the truck every day, I never really thought about it. And then that particular day, I didn't have my harness, which meant we had to back out and go to a different stand because we didn't have time to quad into that far one and get there before daybreak, and we would have bumped the bucks. And sure enough, right around 8 or 9 a.m., there was a buck on the camera at that stand. So if I'd have been sitting where I was supposed to be sitting, so yet again, I'll take full responsibility for that. And the thing was, I'd gotten over the mental hurdle. Like, I had convinced myself the night before, all right, we're going to the stand I don't like. It's fine. You're being irrational. You're harnessed in. You're safe. The tree's not going to fall over. It's not a big deal. And I was actually into it. I was like, okay, let's do this. And then forgetting my harness, it was kind of a bit of a piss off on my part. And then we just ended up going to another poplar stand that was like identical anyways. So if I was going to be stuck way up a poplar, I would have much preferred to be up the poplar that actually had buck activity on it. You know what I mean? So yeah, and I don't even feel like a play-by-play of each stand's activity is even worthwhile. Essentially, I saw very, very few deer. There were a few stands where I would see decent doe activity. You know, like 4 or 5 does would come out during one sit, and then maybe 1 or 2 spikes would be with them. And then there was multiple days where I would literally see nothing at all. Like I would sit in a stand and this is the other thing. On average, I was doing like a 6-hour sit in the morning and like a 3 to 4 hour sit at night. And we're having maybe a 2-hour break in the middle. So I do feel like, that's pretty challenging. It was about -20 most of the days. So sitting for 6 hours at -20, and we'll get into the gear part, is not, it's not an easy thing to do. So even though I kind of wish I had been more comfortable with the heights, I also feel like I did, a pretty reasonably good job for my first, significant whitetail tree stand hunting experience. But I will say that the lack of deer I was seeing was really starting to play on my mind by the end of the hunt. Like I talk about this quite a bit, and I like to think of myself as a really optimistic or disciplined hunter. But when you're going day after day after day at -20 and you just are never seeing shooter bucks, the sitting becomes harder and harder and harder. And it's like, I never came out of a stand unreasonably early. I never gave up. But like, okay, let's say on the last day, for example, the goal again was to try and go in and sit all day. And I think I came out at 1 o'clock, went in close to 6 and came out close to 1. So like 7 hours I sat for. And we talked about it in the truck afterwards. And he was like, what made you come down, just out of curiosity? And I was like, listen, if somebody had put a gun to my head and said, you got to make it another 4 hours in this stand, I could have made it. But my back was jacked up. My ass was numb. Like, you get pretty beat up from sitting in these things for this long a time. And yet again, I sat for 7 hours and one tiny buck the whole time comes by. And you just get to this point where you're like, this is enough. Like, let's get down from here and let's go try something else. Like, there's nothing around here, which I think is probably more of a function of like the mental toughness. And I think, mental toughness comes in a variety of forms, and discipline comes in a variety of forms. Just because you're disciplined and mentally tough in one area doesn't necessarily mean you're disciplined and mentally tough in all areas. And because this was a new challenge for me, I feel like I have room for improvement. I feel like I do need to prove something to myself with all day sits. That's my goal for next year, is to find a similar hunt and maybe do some training beforehand, but like figure out how to just sit all day. So I can go out at 6 o'clock in the morning, come back at 6 o'clock at night, and just sit all day. I'm going to do some experimentation with saddles near home, because I've got some ideas for some mule deer hunting that I want to experiment. I really do like stand hunting in principle. I like sitting. I like being quiet. I like waiting for things to walk by. It's like a super cool experience when there's something right underneath you and they don't know that you're there. But there's just a couple elements of this hunt that just didn't, I guess, like work with my personality very well. And so I want to take the things that I did like about it and fix the things that I didn't like about it and continue on and see if I can get better at this. So, I guess that's really the hunt. It was really like we were home based, just staying at his house. His old lady did the cooking every day. It was a really great experience. Other than that, like, everybody was super cool. Everybody was nice. I felt very comfortable. Food was really good. Yeah, I just wasn't prepared for the heights. It got much better by the end of the trip, but I feel like if naturally that's an issue for you, you really want to look out for that if you're going on a whitetail hunt. Really dig into what type of stands you're going to be sitting in, because it will affect your ability to endure. You know what I'm saying? Like, just adding that extra, like, exerting your will or executing with discipline takes effort. It takes mental effort and it takes physical effort. And so the whole time, this is why people cheat on their diets at night. You can exercise that will all day, but then what happens is you burn out and you run out of mental will. You run out of discipline. It's a gas tank just like everything else. And I feel like for me, that was part of what was going on in the tree stand. Like, I would get up there at 6 o'clock in the morning, and then I was just exerting my discipline to force myself to do something that I didn't really want to do the whole time. And then I would hit 12 or 1 o'clock and I would just be out of gas. I'd be like, I'm done with this. Again, I think if I'd have been seeing deer, it would have filled up my tank again, you know, and I would have been able to kind of, you know, pursue it longer. But yeah, don't really have anything negative to say. It is what it is. It was a learning experience. Would have been nice to see more deer, but I think there were some variables at play that no one was really in control of, and it is what it is. So now what I want to do is, I've got a bunch of notes in my phone that I took during the hunt, and this might seem a little all over the place, but I don't want to gloss over any of them. So I'm just going to go through them one at a time and then explain kind of what my thoughts are and why I wrote the note. So the first thing I wrote down is 10-yard pin. When you're up in a tree stand, I think everybody listening to this podcast is going to understand the distance or the difference between slope distance and horizontal distance. Now, those are engineering terms. So another way to think about that is line of sight and horizontal distance. Like, if you are looking at a pyramid, okay, the distance from one point to another across the ground would be considered the horizontal distance, and the distance up one side and then down the other side would be considered the line of sight or the slope distance. Line of sight or slope distance tends to be longer than horizontal distance. Doesn't tend to be, it always is. And the steeper your angle, the greater the difference between the slope distance and the horizontal distance. But when you are calculating drop of a projectile, whether it be a bullet or an arrow, you only factor in the horizontal component of the distance. Okay? So let's break this down. Now, if you're 30 feet up in a tree stand and there is an animal 10 meters out from the base of the tree, the slope distance of that shot might be somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 20 meters. Like, the arrow will actually travel 15 or 20 meters through the air. However, it's only going to traverse the 10 meters of horizontal distance between the bottom of the tree and the deer. So when you're compensating for that drop, you only compensate for the 10 meters, not the 20 meters. And so when you put a pin on the animal, you don't use the 20 meter pin, you would use a 10 meter pin. Because, and I don't want to get super technical on here, but if you're going to think about physics, forces only work in vectors. And because gravity pulls straight down, it only works on the part of the projectile path that is on that horizontal plane. It's not like it pulls it down for 20 meters. It only pulls it down for the 10. And I don't want to, dig into the weeds too much. But what that means is your shot, you end up having the opportunity for a lot of really short shots when you're in a tree stand. Like a lot of sub 20-yard shots, potentially. I mean, again, I didn't have any bucks, so who knows where the bucks could have been. But some of these stands I was at, you wouldn't have shot any further than that anyways. Either the brush got too thick or there were big trees. Like you were really focused on a pretty small area directly under the stand. And in hindsight, I think if you were going to do one of these hunts where you were really high up in a tree and most of the animals were going to be really close underneath you, I think it would be really beneficial to have a 10-yard pin, because I only have a 20-yard pin. So I can hold over or hold under, but if the animal is only, ranging at 10 yards away and you're using a 20-yard pin, I mean, that's a lot of guesswork. And it's not like you can even, it's not like you can gap shoot it. Like the nice thing about, let's say shooting at 25 and you have a 20-yard pin and a 30-yard pin, you can gap shoot between that 20 and the 30. And as long as the 20 is like on the spine and the 30 is on the belly, the 25 is going to be right in the middle. But when you start getting above your first pin and below your last pin, not having that second point of reference really inhibits the accuracy of the shot. So I was even thinking this a couple times. If I get one of these 10 or 12 yard shots, like it's borderline ethical just because I've never shot a whole lot of stuff at 10 yards. So just to wrap that up, I think I would work on my bow a couple weeks beforehand and maybe switch up my sighting a little bit and have a 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 instead of a 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. Or, this is my next point, I think no matter what, you have to do a bunch of elevated shooting practice. One of the tips the guy gave me kind of halfway through is that I should have brought a practice tip. And then every time you're about to get down from the stand for the day, assuming there's no deer around, shoot your practice arrow. So that at least every day you're getting an opportunity to A, shoot your bow, and B, get elevated shooting experience. So that was the other thing that I would do more of in hindsight. I would figure out a way to get more elevated shooting experience. I've obviously shot downhills and uphills, but it's not like that when you're shooting right off of a tree stand. And the other thing I think you need to get experience with is when you're standing on one of these really little platforms and you start leaning over at a severe angle, it's almost like a little bit of vertigo kicks in. And I did come to full draw several times on like does and little spike bucks just to get the practice. And a couple times I had to lean over really severely. And it really takes some experience to do that and not completely think you're going to fall off the stand. So that's point number 2. Before another one of these tall tree stand hunts, I want to get a lot more elevated shooting experience. Next point, problems with heights. I think I've already delved into this one as much as I need to. It was definitely one of my issues, and I do think my odds would have been better if I was naturally better with heights. I think I was much better near the end. But just to reiterate, if you have an issue with heights and you're going to go do one of these hunts, be very clear about what type of stand situation you're going to be in, because it will affect the quality of your experience. I want to get, the next point here was supposed to be my fun hunt. So that's the other thing. I booked this last year because I thought, I do all these kind of ridiculous mountain hunts and everybody's always like, I can't believe you spend your vacation time doing these, ridiculous things. And I enjoy it, but it's also very hard. It's hard on my body. It's hard on my mind. I love it, but it's a grind. And you come home like pretty beat up, pretty sore and tired. And I always like to have at least one hunt on the calendar each year that's just fun. Not everything has to be some big mental and physical challenge. It's okay to do shit that's just fun sometimes. And in my mind, based on my previous experience, just hanging out in a stand, waiting for a whitetail buck to come walking by, seemed pretty fun. When you threw in the heights, this was the most mentally challenging hunt I've done all year. Like 11 days solo stone sheep hunting is a joke compared to this. Literally, this was really, really mentally challenging. I don't think it would be the case for everybody, but I think, the way I feel about heights and my lack of previous experience, It was just tough. And that made it not a fun hunt. It made it, okay, we're on a grinder. We're going to wake up every morning. We're going to have that pit in our stomach and we're going to like fight through it and we're going to get through the day. And I don't mind that. I think you grow from those experiences, but that wasn't the intention for this hunt. And that's why it was like, it's not disappointing, but it was just, yeah, it maybe disappointing is the right word because it wasn't what I was expecting. Point number 2, frozen wet wipes. So, just in case you're curious, wet wipes are not the best item to bring when you're going to be sitting in a stand at minus 20 all day. Not that you're going to take a dump in the stand anyways, but you might have to right after you get down, or my pack usually sat in the back of the truck on the way to the stand. You might, a couple hundred yards before you get to the stand, need to go, number 2. And I just kept pulling out these frozen wet wipes. And I was just like, my God. So yeah, on winter hunts, leave the wet wipes at home. You can always, put a little snow on your toilet paper to get it a little bit wet for that extra cleaning. Wet wipes sucked. The other thing I will say on that note is make sure to bring an empty bottle with you up into the stand because you don't want to piss down onto the ground. And I got pretty good at pissing into a bottle on these, not so large tree stands. And that's something else you're definitely going to want to be prepared for. Because if you're up there for 7 hours and you bring, a coffee up with you, I was taking a thermos of coffee every day, at some point you're going to need to take a leak and you can't piss on the ground. So have a bottle to do it in. Next note, minimize pack load and optimize reachability. So the first day, I had a ton of stuff in my pack. I was going to film it and I had extra clothes. I had tons of water. I just had all sorts of stuff. And when I got up in that sketchy stand, like it was just a nightmare because the pack was probably 35 pounds. All the stuff that I really wanted was buried under other stuff. And it was just really anxiety inducing to try and get this pack hooked on the tree. Then when I needed something, unhook it from the tree, find room for it on the stand, get what I wanted, put it back. And so by the end of the second day, I had completely retooled my system. I realized there's only like 3 or 4 things I need here, like a little bit of food, my coffee, my grunt tube, my rattle bag, and like maybe 1 or 2 other little things. So everything came out of my backpack, didn't need the extra clothes, decided immediately I'm not filming this hunt because I just had such anxiety up there. It was just one other variable. I didn't want to worry about it. I just wanted to focus on sitting still in the stand and waiting for deer. So got rid of all the camera gear, got rid of all the extra clothes, and then took everything that I was going to need and either put it on my person or put it in reachable pockets and kept my bag as light as possible and the critical items as reachable as possible. And this really made my life a lot easier and reduced my anxiety in the stand and made me a much more efficient hunter. So that was a big takeaway for me. And it's also about noise. I'm already looking at hunts next year and thinking even if I was sitting in a ground blind, I would want to do the same thing because you want to be going into that pack as little as possible. Every time you unclip a buckle, every time you unzip a zipper, these are noises that animals could be hearing. So you want to keep that as little as possible. I talked to my guide's dad, who is just this absolute savage of a dude, super cool guy. And he said, and this guy's been stand hunting for like 40 years. And he said, he doesn't even carry a pack anymore. He wears a vest. And there's enough pockets in the vest that he keeps everything he needs in the vest. So he just walks, climbs up the tree, sits down, everything he needs is in his vest. And I thought to myself, that's the ticket. Like, that's what I would do next time. So yeah, that really increased my efficiency. Up next, I say get better at asking questions. And I think on a whole, I'm like maybe batting 50-50 with guided hunts. I don't do a ton of guided hunts. Maybe I average like one a year or one every other year. And I've had everything from really bad experiences to really good experiences. But up till now, even the good experiences have just been luck. They haven't been because I did any great amount of research or really, proofed out or validated or verified how good an outfitter was. I mean, I ask a handful of questions and I usually get a reference or two. But every time there's something on a guided hunt that I didn't enjoy or surprised me in a negative way, it's something I didn't ask a question about. And so I think not only on guided hunts, but even on DIY hunts, if we can get better at asking questions and either asking the potential guide those questions or asking ourselves questions about the hunt, we can be less surprised by fewer elements of the hunt and therefore have a better experience. Now, how could I improve this? Like I mentioned before, I think talking to more whitetail specific hunters or more hunters with a lot of whitetail experience and being like, what are the variables I should be concerned with? What types of things do you notice affect success? What are some of the things people tend to forget or screw up most often? And really picking the brains of these whitetail hunters before either planning your own whitetail hunt or booking a whitetail hunt with a guide, I think would just increase your ability to get the hunt you're looking for and be more satisfied in the hunt experience as a whole. So, good rule in life, get better at asking questions. Okay, I got some notes about boots and the body bag that I'm going to save for the gear section. And then I wrote myself a note, and I'll just read it here. Discuss how your mindset shifts after days of not seeing any animals go by. Honestly critique yourself that you could have been mentally tougher and sat longer. And I talked about this earlier. I do think the days of not seeing things added up and kind of chinked away at my metal armor. I allowed that to happen. And I think that if I was going to be honestly critical of myself, I think I can be mentally tougher moving forward. And I think there's definitely room for improvement in how high of a tree I want to be in and how long I can sit there in a variety of weather conditions. And then the final note is love the process. So here's the deal. I feel like I've been fairly negative in my portrayal of this hunt. But I still want to be very clear. There was no morning I woke up and wanted to be anywhere else. Even when I was anxious about the day or maybe a little hesitant about some of the things I had to do during the day, I still love hunting. And I think having urgency for the process is equally as important as having urgency for the outcome. I think everybody is focused on the dead animal at the end to the point that they're dismissing the whole process in between. And I still loved, as difficult as it was and as shitty as it was at times, I didn't want to leave. I enjoyed being there, and I enjoyed the struggle of the process itself. And I think, especially on hunts that aren't what you expect and are maybe asking more of you than you feel capable of giving at any time, reminding yourself that this is what I love, and that even people we love do things we don't like, and hunts we love can do things we don't like. You don't need to like it, but you can love it. And that helped me a couple times, because I would find myself getting like a little bitter and a little resentful and starting to think, oh, things should be different, or this isn't what I was expecting. And then I would kind of reiterate that mantra to myself. love the process, man. You tell yourself you're a hunter and you tell yourself this is what you're all about. Is it really what you're all about? And then that would remind me, yeah, you're only here for 1 week and then that's it. And then you got to go back to work. So really be present and appreciate this process. Okay, let's dig into the gear. Now, I don't have a gear list in front of me, so I'm going to do my best to recall everything by memory. And in order to do that, I'm just going to start at the feet and work my way up. So when I first started, I was wearing a pair of smart wool socks and a pair of Schnee's pack boots, the Hunter 2s. And they had the 400 gram, I believe they're Thinsulate liners. You know, the kind of like gray, silvery ones that you can pull in and out of the boots. And for those of you who are unaware, a pack boot is a boot that has a leather upper and a rubber bottom. Like the shell of the boot that you slide your foot in is rubber, and then everything from your instep up is leather. I love these kind of boots. When I used to work in forestry and I had to wear corks, I would primarily wear this style of corks. I didn't like the pumpkins. I don't like the big black tusks. I like the Viberg style logger boots. And so Schnee's has a pair of these. They're called the Hunter 2s. They're really nice. I bought them when they still had customizable lengths. So mine are 16 inches high. I think you can only buy them 10 or 12 inches high now. Either way, that's what I had. The first day or two of the hunt, they worked great. As soon as temperatures got below minus, let's say 15, and you were sitting still all day, they were insufficient. My toes got really, really cold. I was still able to make it till about 11, but the sits got closer to maybe 4.5 hours than like the 5.5 or 6 that they were before. Now, 2 things happened after that. Number 1, after the really cold day, I went to Mark's Work Warehouse and I bought like the biggest, most gigantic, thickest, old school wool socks I could find. And I had a bunch of those little hand warmer packets. And so what I would do is put a hand warmer in between the 2 socks right by my toes, and then I would have the better sock. I'd say this gave me about another 5 degrees and would increase the amount of time I would sit. But it's still, once we started hitting that like minus 20 with wind chill, it was insufficient. I wouldn't recommend it. You certainly wouldn't last all day like that. Now, on the very last day, and I'm skipping over a bunch of stuff, but we'll circle back. On the very last day, I used this thing. I think it's called an Arctic shield. Other people call them body heaters or body bags. And they're basically like this giant jumpsuit with no arms that's kind of like just a bag with legs. And it's made out of like a canvas material with a lot of insulation. And you basically zip yourself up inside this thing. And you're just in a giant hardcore sleeping bag with legs. Now, when I put that, even just on my bottom half, and I put my feet in my boots inside of that I would say gave me another 5 degrees at least, and definitely got it to the point where I could have made it all day in minus 20 with those boots, 100%. So one of the things I want to look into, there's 2 things that you could do for boots if you're going to be stand hunting at minus 20. All these temperatures are in Celsius. I apologize, my American friends. For context, minus 20 degrees Celsius is equivalent to minus 4 degrees Fahrenheit. And for further context, Celsius and Fahrenheit line up at minus 32. So minus 32 is the same on both scales. So you have 2 options. One would be to get a pair of those Arctic boots. Baffin makes some. I think Lacrosse might make some. But I'm talking like a rubber style boot with a crazy amount of insulation that's good to like minus 40. The only problem with these is that if you have even a slightly significant walk in, your feet are going to start to sweat. And if your feet start to sweat, they're going to get cold later on in the hunt. Almost nothing you can do about that. So what I would prefer to do is stick with the pack boot sock combo that I have and find a pair of like slip over booties that are made out of the similar material as these body bags, like a canvas that's heavily insulated, so that when you get up in the stand, you could almost have like little waders, not full bibs, but little, boot sleeves that would come up to your knee or your hip and then have a little drawstring. I think that would be ideal, because then you could walk in a boot system that wouldn't make your feet sweat. And then once you got up into the stand, you could slip these boot covers on and endure -20 all day. So I'm going to be looking for a product like that. I haven't seen a product like that. I'm sure it exists somewhere, even if it's like a little cottage gear company that just makes them. And if it doesn't, I was thinking you buy one of these body heater bags and you just cut the legs off and have a seamstress tie you in a draw cord and close the top of each leg, and you'd have two separate kind of booties that you could pull on over your hunting boots. So there was the boot system. Got me through, but not ideal. And that's really the only fundamental part of the system that I would change. Now I'm going to describe the rest of what I wore. So I had a pair of Arc'teryx Modus AR long johns, which are probably my favorite long johns ever. And then the first part of the trip, I was wearing a short sleeve core lightweight t-shirt as a base layer. Over top of that, on the bottoms, I had the Sitka Fanatic bibs, which are their like -20 rated bibs. And then up top, over top of the short sleeve, I had the Sitka Ambient hoodie and the Sitka Fanatic jacket. Now, after the second day, when we started experiencing temperatures in that -20 range, I ditched the short sleeve t-shirt and I replaced that with the core heavyweight hoodie and left the Sitka Ambient hoodie on over the core heavyweight hoodie. That combined with the Sitka the Sitka Fanatic jacket was like the system. It was incredible. For any of my hike-ins, I would strap my Fanatic jacket to my bag and I would just go in the Ambient hoodie and the heavyweight hoodie. And then I would get up into the stand. Then I would put my jacket on. But that, even at -20, my body and my legs and my arms, everything was perfectly fine. I was super happy with how that performed. I'm going to do a more detailed review of the Fanatic system as a YouTube video, because I think most of the other guys were wearing like down pants and stuff, and I think it will work, but the Fanatic system is so incredibly warm while being so incredibly quiet that I think it deserves like a bit more of a detailed breakdown. But it worked incredibly well. Now, for gloves, I brought two kinds. I brought the Sitka Blizzard gloves, which are like an insulated 3-in-1 mitt. So they have a synthetically insulated mitt, and then they have a Gore-Tex shell. And then I also brought a pair of merino glove liners from Mountain Equipment, no longer Co-op, Mountain Equipment Company, but MEC, the hiking store. These are some of my favorite gloves. They're so versatile, and they've got the conductive fingertips, so you can use your touchscreen devices while you're wearing them. And I bet you I wore those and those alone 99% of the time. I maybe put the mitts on once or twice just to warm up, but to be honest, I could have just left the mitts at home the entire time. Now, I was only able to do that because the Fanatic jacket has a muff built in. So it basically has this big kangaroo pocket in the front with an unbelievable amount of insulation. So I would just sit on the stand with my hands in this muff, and what I ended up doing for the second half of the trip when it was crazy cold is I would take a couple of those hand warmers, shake them up, and throw them in the muff. And then when my hands were cold, I would put them in the muff and I would hold the hand warmers. Hands would get warm, or I'd want to look at something on my phone, I'd take my hands out. And it was unbelievable to me how perfect that system worked. Now, I also practiced shooting my bow, because I use a hinge release, while wearing those merino liners. You want to be a little careful because the metal release can get slippery in the liner gloves because they're just like merino. There's no grippy parts on them. I was almost thinking of spraying a little Plasti Dip on the two fingers, just so that when you grabbed your release, there was like a rubberized coating there that would give you some purchase. But that glove system worked phenomenal. Now, for a toque, I wish I could remember what these are called. The first one was a light Sitka beanie, and it's kind of like my all-purpose beanie. I take it with me on all my hunts, and usually I just wear it when I'm sleeping because my quilts don't have hoods. But it held up perfectly fine for the first half of the hunt, especially because if I would get cold, both the Sitka heavyweight hoodie and the Sitka ambient hoodie have hoods. So when you put those two hoods on top of the toque you're already wearing, it's more than enough. Now, when we got to the last couple days of the hunt and it started getting seriously cold, I think that first one might be called the Sitka Jetstream beanie. It's thin, but it has a layer of windstopper in it. And then I think the next toque I wore, it might be called the Sitka Fanatic beanie or the Sitka Fanatic toque. And it is this giant, Russian-looking Berber fleece thing that's like pretty wild and insanely warm, like almost too warm. I wasn't even putting a hood up with that thing. Like you'd be good to minus 40 in that toque. And it was fantastic. Now, I'm trying to think. I was rocking the same prototype pack that I've been testing for the last while now. There was really nothing to talk about with the pack. It was overkill. I am in the market for a day pack for stuff like this, a day pack with a meat shelf. So I'm probably going to do a day pack review shortly so that I can figure out what day pack I want to own and run on a daily basis. But probably something in the neighborhood of like 3,200 cubic inches, because as well as you can pack down these expedition bags, it's still not the same as having a day pack dedicated designed pack. Like they're just better. So nothing really noteworthy to talk about the pack. I already did a big episode on my archery gear. That remained the same. Hoyt Ultra RX7, hinge release, same arrow setup, that whole 9 yards. I don't know what the name brand of the harness I wore was. I liked it. It's just, kind of canvas webbing or nylon webbing with some carabiners and stuff. It worked really well. Used some paracord to lower and raise my bow every time. I had like a tie-off rope that I was using. Didn't really use any technology. Food was pretty simple. Yeah, I think that's, as far as gear for this hunt, that's about it. And other than changing up the boots next time, switching to a much smaller day bag, I don't think there's really a whole lot, and then having some type of like booty system, I don't think there's really a whole lot different that I would do. So you have it. That is my archery whitetail hunt in Northern Alberta. Didn't see a lot of deer, learned a lot about that style of hunting and a lot about myself, what I'm capable of and what I'm not. Overall, grateful for the experience, grateful to have met some cool new people. If you have any questions or something you feel like I left out or screwed up, jay@mindfulhunter.com or mindful_hunter on Instagram. Again, please take a moment to go check out Mindful Reviews at mindful-reviews.com. I really think we're going to build something that's well worth the asking price. Memberships will be going up once we hit I kind of have these milestones of members, and once we hit that number, the price kind of goes up each time, because I want to incentivize people for taking a risk early on, because the community is not fully truthed out yet. It's not fully built out. There's still a lot of cool things to come. And for the early adopters, I think they should be rewarded. So that's why the prices are the way they are right now. I think probably in the next year, you will see the prices close to double what they are now. But that's not going to happen anytime soon. So I'm not trying to, create a sense of urgency. Take your time. And if you have any questions, let me know. If you could engage with the podcast in any way, that would be greatly appreciated. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Pass it off to a friend. Send somebody an email or a text message and say this is bringing you value. That would be greatly appreciated. As always, thank you for tuning in.